many months, we've been talking about the possibility of a US recession. And as opposed to the idea of a US recession, many have been holding out the golden bough, the possibility of a soft landing. But right now, as we've gone through the year and there hasn't been a recession, we're now looking at the possibility of achieving a genuine American soft landing. And the problem is, when you look at it, you realize you should be careful what you wish for, because this soft landing suggests a period of very slow, even miserable growth that goes on for 2, almost 3 years. When we look at the latest available numbers from what we call the blue chip consensus, which is the group of most highly rated forecasters in the US economy, what we see is that growth this year is expected to be 1.8%. So 1.8% for 2023 is not a bad number. It's exactly long-term trend growth. But in order to get inflation down, you have to produce a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, of lower than trend growth. And with lower than trend growth, you can get higher unemployment. And with higher unemployment, you can put downward pressure on inflation, so the problem of inflation can finally be beaten. So this year, we're expected that headline inflation, or the blue chip consensus expects that headline inflation will finish at around about 4.1%. Hey, that's a whole lot better than the 7% last year, but that's headline inflation, not necessarily core inflation. Unemployment this year finishes at 3.6%, which is just slightly above the low for the year and close to the lowest levels in the last 50 years. And payroll growth this year is expected to be pretty strong, 2.3% growth in payroll employment. Manufacturing output is expected to be to grow quite dramatically by over 30%. And this is the recovery from the slump in the manufacture of things like motor vehicles or aircraft, recovering from the slump inflicted during the pandemic. And interestingly, what's actually allowing the soft landing to happen, in spite of very rapid tightening of interest rates by the Federal Reserve, is major support by the US budget deficit. And the US budget deficit this year is expected to come in at 6.4% of GDP. Now, for long-term comparison, the long-term US budget deficit is about 2.4% of GDP. So we are a number of times the normal level of US budget deficit. And that's what's been holding up the economy in spite of tightening Fed policy. And that's why we haven't had a hard recession. But right now, what happens as we go into this extended slowdown or soft landing in the US economy, growth next year in 2024 falls to 1.2%. Still positive, but very, very low, and the lowest level for the next 3 years. As that happens, inflation falls further. This is headline inflation falls further to 2.7%, which is a pretty good number. But unemployment starts to rise to 4% next year. Payroll employment, which is 2.3% of this year, slumps to only 0.3% next year. And matter of fact, that's next year, the beginning of next year, we'll see the highest number of people employed in the workforce for the next 3 years. After that, the number starts to fall. Manufacturing starts to go into negative territory with a fall of about 5%, and the US budget deficit holds its steady support at about 5.8% of GDP. In 2025, growth picks up a little from the 1.2% of 24, but only to 1.5%. The CPI holds at 2.6%. Unemployment really starts to rise then to 4.6%, and payroll employment falls. That is to say, the total number of people in the workforce falls to 0.2% in 2025. Manufacturing slumps by 12%, in activity. That's where all the jobs went in 2025. But the budget deficit still holds up at about 6% of GDP, still supporting the economy. And finally, we get a little bit of a recovery, but way out in 2026, after 2 years of absolutely miserable growth in the US economy. It's not until 2026 that we get the beginning of a recovery, but growth of only 1.7%, just getting back up to trend, CPI holding at about 2.3%, unemployment rising further to 4.8%, no jobs growth, almost no jobs growth way out in 26, employment growth of only 0.4%, manufacturing still slumping by 8% that year, but the budget deficit holding it all together with a budget deficit of about 5.9% of GDP. So what that scenario tells us is, for the blue chip consensus, is, we might avoid a hard landing, which is a deep recession, but what we get instead is maybe 3 years of miserable growth, miserable growth in which there's no increase in jobs, that people have employed actually fall, the number of employment go up, and a time which you'll feel like an extended recession, even though it's not actually a recession. So the moral of the story is everybody wished for a soft landing instead of a recession, but this is going to be, the US economy is going to be pretty tough for the next 2 years, and many people will think they should have been careful what they wished for.